If I was to give this to a child, they would have an immediate reaction to this, or this, or this. So this is a Spinosaurus tooth, and it's 95 million years old. And if I hand this over to a child, which I've done many, many times, the awe and wonder on their face is quite something. And actually, you've got to be prepared if you're going to do stuff like this, that they will break and that you will have to take the consequences. But that was great because we had a whole session on what was inside the Spinosaurus tooth when it broke as well. But handing something like this to a child, what happens is they see the object and they're immediately taken in by it. So the moment occurs and they're drawn into, what is this? And we have a discussion about, well, what does it look like? And we talk about all kinds of things. Some people think it's a foot. Then they eventually, well, it's a bone, but what kind of bone? Is it a fossil? It's kind of a fossil, it's partly fossilized. But what's happening is that in their minds, they're on a journey and they're actually creating little stories in their heads about what this thing is. Some of them are quite fanciful and fantastic, and some of them are quite analytical. And what could this be? I need to know what this is. What is this? It's a 1,000-year-old ancient Roman arrowhead, long throw arrowhead. And what is this? And we get down to it eventually. And if you're interested, this is what would be a collarbone of a Megaloceros giganteus, which is a huge giant elk. And this is 11,000 years old, and it's partly fossilized remains of a giant, imagine a giant deer that walked in Scotland about 11,000 years ago. But what happened then was the children were taken away from their normal daily routine into the world where this creature lived. That's immersion, and that's what immersion is all about. It's about creating something that takes the children, and the teacher as well, takes them into another world. And it's very, very powerful. And if you understand immersion, then there's so much you can do. But that is what immersion is. It's a book, it's a piece of music, it's a film, it's a feeling, it's an experience, it's a smell that takes you away from where you are and fills your mind with the possibilities or the hints of something that this object or your scenario and your surroundings takes you to. And that is immersion. So why would I do something like this? Well, as a teacher, an educator, there's very specific purpose around doing that, around initiating immersion, because that gives me the opportunity to do something to follow up with the context. So most people think that teaching is all about the delivery of facts, about knowledge. But yes, that's a large part of it. But in order to do that effectively, one of the great ways that we can achieve that is by initiating some form of immersive experience. And holding this in your hand is an immersive experience. It could be a virtual reality headset, it could be the use of an iPad, you could be doing some artwork, it could be anything. There are lots and lots of ways that we can induce that immersive moment for a pupil. But the reason we do it is because we want that knowledge, those facts, to follow through with that immersive feeling. So when the child is open, when you are ready to receive those things, it's far, far easier for them to receive and to understand what they've just got, and also for them to retain what they've just received as well, because that immersive experience opens up the brain. Something happens on a deep cognitive level that when you are immersed and you are ready, you are ready to receive information, ready to receive the learning. And that's really, really important. And that's why we create immersive experiences. And in Discovery Education, of course, we're very aware of the role that technology has to play in that. So I can't provide one of these for every pupil. I'd love to be able to do things like that, but we can't do that. So what we have to do is try and recreate something approaching this moment for pupils so that they can then become immersed. So using technology and using things like augmented reality and virtual reality, what we can do is provide the pupil with a scenario, a place, or an experience, an encounter with something that really pops them out of their day-to-day learning experience. And in that doing so, the teacher then can step into that void that we create, and we can fill it with the knowledge, we can fill it with a deeper understanding, but also we can fill it with an opportunity for them to then express that knowledge in different ways too. And I always believe that by creating immersion, we create opportunities for children to be creative as well. So why immersion? Why do it? Well, again, I've got another artifact here, and this is a bronze arrowhead. It's about 1 BC, so it's about 2,000 years old. And this was made by Roman soldiers somewhere in Europe, somewhere in Spain, we think. And this was used at some point, and it was found discarded on the ground. And it's a fascinating object because actually if you hold it up at one angle, it actually looks like a rocket ship, and people have described it in that way as well. But there's all kinds of things we can talk to children about this. And what's happening, as we know, is that when you're going through an immersive experience, is that your brain is now focusing on how the context of this object. And that's really, really important, and that's why we immerse. Because we've already started the process now. This object has served its purpose. It's drawn the children into a narrative that they're creating in their own minds around the history of this, so the facts, the knowledge, the information, which is really important, but also the stories around, well, who used this? What happened? And gruesome things too, like, did this kill somebody? Did this injure somebody? Where was it found? What happened to it? All of that begs the questions. And what's great as well about objects like this, and this is a historical object, it could be anything, it could be a scientific artifact as well, is that they're open. So they're leaving it in the students' hands to then fill in the gaps as well. So we've got the hard facts around this. And what's great is that through immersion, and the reason we immerse, is that the children take on the hard facts really, really easily and eagerly, because this has got them to the point where that's easy to do. So we're opening a window, and we're filming in front of a green screen here. And that's the green screen in their mind, and that's why that's there, to show us that actually every child has that green screen in their mind. And immersion is important to initiating that green screen in their heads, so that they can then create their own scenarios fueled with the knowledge around this as well, and to create some fantastic work, and to create it quickly and with passion. We can't provide artifacts like this for every pupil. We're not in schools physically with objects, but what we can do is we can use technology to create these moments, these experiences, these encounters with things like this, and whole environments like that. So we can use life scale, room scale augmented reality that you can walk around. We can use augmented reality to show you this object. It's not the same as holding it in your hand. So therefore we have to compensate, and we have to use other techniques to improve the atmosphere, the impact that experience is going to have on the child as well. But it's really, really important, because by understanding that point of immersion and how it happens, we can apply that in our technology and the way we create experiences virtually to mirror that. And that's an amazing way, because pupils, teachers have access to devices, they have access to networks, technology, and it's about using those devices instead of just typing up things in Word and creating great stuff in that way. It's like, well, no, let's use it as a window. Let's use it as a window to immersion, and then for them to then create and use those same devices to actually follow on from that and create their own amazing responses to the experience they've just encountered. So I've got an artifact here, and this is a trench whistle. Actually, it's a replica of a 1916 trench whistle. So if you were in the trenches in 1916, maybe on the eve of the Battle of the Somme, this would be the thing you probably feared the most. You would absolutely dread this. Not the object itself, but the sound that it makes. Because you knew that when this whistle was blown at very high volume, that you would have to go over the top. And you'd have to face your mortality perhaps, and all the horrors that would go along with that. So things like this are very powerful to people that have had direct experience of this. Sadly, none of those are with us anymore. But they're important objects because they convey something. And already, with our understanding of the principles of immersion, many of you will be imagining that scenario and what it would feel like, and your dread of this trench whistle and what this trench whistle meant to you and your own fate. So we don't need to have this, but what we can do is, understanding what happens, we can use the technology of the classroom to recreate that environment. So First of all, what we're trying to do, and immersive experiences are all about the emotional response to something. And by emotional, some people think we often mean that it's getting to you, you're going to be upset, or no, it's not just that. That can be a response to it, but it can be excitement, it can be awe, it can be wonder, it can be surprise, it can be anticipation. All of these emotions all lead to what happens next. So we're looking at this example as well. Then if you imagine creating and amplifying the atmosphere that would come around this in a classroom, we can start to create immersive experiences. You can turn the lights down. If you've got blackout curtains, you can use those. You can talk, you can prepare something. So you can speak to the class and describe what it means for this and look at their faces as they take it in. And you can see them running in their green screen in their minds, running the movie of what they would feel like to be in that situation itself. There's an amazing canon of poetry that exists around World War I, so you can call on that to also, again, the poetry is a fantastic vehicle for amplifying the emotions that people felt and people still feel around the thoughts of those experiences as well and what they might feel like. The sounds that would come along with that, the distant bombardment, the coughing of soldiers, the rain, the feeling of what it would be like to be in that scenario. And then your heartbeat, the thumping of your heart as you waited for the dreaded whistle. All of those things can be used, and used very, very carefully. And I have to say we have to be very careful about how we use some of these techniques because they can be very, very powerful in the classroom. So use them carefully with the age of the children, so it has to be very age appropriate. But it works, and what you find is that the pupils are then drawn into that. Now, if we then add something like virtual reality and we get them in there and we can actually get them to walk around an environment like that and experience it and feel it, to go under the sea to feel what it would be like 65 million years ago, to encounter an ancient plesiosaur, a reptile from 65 million years ago, that's an incredible thing to do as well. Something you couldn't normally do. You can't go back in time to experience these things. You can't walk in a trench, but you can create the atmosphere, and using technology you can replicate some of the conditions that you would encounter in those scenarios as well. We don't want children to be in that situation, but what we do want them to do is to have empathy, and we want them to come out and be able to write, to be able to express, to paint, to write poems, to record video, audio. We want them to be able to do all of those things because in doing so, they're expressing their understanding of the knowledge and the facts, and then their retention of those facts is incredible under these immersive conditions, but also they learn to express, and they learn to express themselves in a very sophisticated way. One of the more interesting ways recently that we've been experimenting really with applying immersive techniques and developing that immersive experience is in the area of well-being, and particularly mindfulness, where if you think about what we talk about immersion and creating these atmospheric, impactful encounters, experiences, that's actually the gateway. That's one of the first principles you will learn if you are familiar with mindfulness, in that you need to create almost a diversion from your day-to-day in order to go somewhere else or to take your mind away from that thing that's making you feel sad or stressed. And we know that just right now that lots of pupils are going through all kinds of things and grappling with the situation we find ourselves in, returning to school, seeing friends for the first time and that they haven't seen for such a long time, and everything else that goes along with that. It's a very complex and very layered scenario. And we recommend that you create these environments no matter what technology you've got available to you. In your classroom, you've got an amazing sound system probably. You've got a fantastic, probably ultra high definition, massive panel in the back of your classroom or the front of your classroom. That's very, very capable. You've got lots of the technology at your disposal that you can use to create environments like this, where actually you can take a moment to create immersion and create a moment for reflection as well. So let's talk about the classroom as a studio, as an immersive studio, and think about the technology that you've got at your disposal inside the classroom. You've got amazing speakers, you've probably got an Ultra HD panel at the front of your class. You've got lots of resources at your disposal that actually you can create all these elements of immersion. And that gives you a great advantage because you're in control. And if you think of it as a studio, you can then direct what happens. And at Discovery Education, we often talk about teachers as almost like film directors and producers in the way that lessons happen and the way they pan out, with all the resources that you're managing and you're bringing it in. And then you're also a conductor as well, because you're conducting all of the responses and you're differentiating, and all of this is happening in this rich environment. You can immerse yourself and you can immerse the children by using the technology then that you've got in your classroom. It's about finding the right resources. On Espresso, we have thousands of clips, audio clips, we have images, we have video files. We've got all the components that you need to assemble those things and create immersive experiences yourself. And of course you can go on the internet and you can Google and you can find things. You can create things as well. And this is something that I'm really strongly in favour of. We consume a lot of content, but I'm really interested in how we create content too. And that's really my purpose, is that through immersion, that yes, we'll consume something, but it's not about watching a film. That is an immersive experience, but it's about creating a prompt, and that's why we immerse, and that's why you can create your own immersive experiences as well, and why they're such a powerful thing to do. So one powerful example of immersion that always stands out for me was quite simple actually. Was using a green screen like this and a camera like I'm looking at now. It was actually an iPad, and using an app that allowed us to use some live green screening. So we had the green screen behind us and the pupil had drawn the backdrop that we were using. So they had a story, they had I think they had a poem actually, and they'd written a poem. It was a lovely poem, and that poem itself came from an immersive experience where they had encountered something virtually through augmented reality, and it had really impacted them. So we found that we had this wonderful amplification effect that happens when you use immersion, that actually the work we were getting out of them was real high quality stuff, and they were desperate to communicate what it was that they'd found out and why they were so excited about it. So they were facing the camera like this, but behind the camera was the display panel in the classroom. So when they looked beyond the camera, they couldn't see the green screen behind them. They could see themselves inside the environment that they'd painted and made for themselves. Now that had a double immersive impact on them, because suddenly they were there. Now it took a little while because they were looking at the camera, they were looking back up at themselves and seeing themselves and hearing themselves, and that they found that a little bit disconcerting. So we let them play. We let them play in the environment and just see what it was like to be there. And you could see them, and then they got their friends in, they were looking around and they could see what's going on. At one point they picked up the bottom of the green screen and turned it into an invisibility cloak, put it over their heads, and that started to get them going as well. And then things started to really get interesting, because the poem, the piece of work they created, started to be edited in their minds, and they started to change it. And you could see that what was happening was they were seeing past the camera, looking at themselves on the screen, and they were there. They were actually in that place, but that place was something they'd drawn, they'd painted, and they'd drawn and painted it, I think, in about 10-15 minutes time. The whole thing took 40 minutes to do from start to finish, but it was quite remarkable to witness. And then when they came to act, because they were acting at this point, they smashed it, they absolutely went for it. And that was fantastic too, because what happened was, yes, they'd written great work. Yes, they'd got it to what I'd like to see. They were giving me everything I'd asked them to do. The language was great, the connectives were all there, the adjectives were there, everything I wanted to see in their writing was present and correct. But the other thing that was there as well was this ability to communicate really, really effectively what it was that was on that piece of paper that they'd created. So the immersive experience turned them into a movie for them, a live movie in which they were the active participants. And so therefore what happened was, yes, the work was great, but they communicated beautifully what it was they wanted to say. And the poem and the bits they'd written and added to it, and the acting that took place from their friends behind them, all added to the whole experience. And they went home absolutely full of it, but also full of the knowledge that came up along with that immersive experience too. So all the facts, all the figures, all the historical data that we were trying to get across from them. They will never forget that. They will never forget all that knowledge, because it came through immersion.